At a time when we're losing our oldest and most precious trees and forests from around the world, I'm curious to understand if and why this matters to all of us. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I'm Tom Hill, and it's here that I meet with people from all walks of life to explore the answers to one essential question. What do trees mean to you? Testing, 1, 2. We're good to go. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so normally at this point in the episode, I'd be giving a bit of background to my upcoming guest. But as you're a mystery guest, I reckon that you should reveal yourself. So, who are you, Mum?
Who are you, Mum? You just told everybody. I'm Tom's mum.
Any more you want to give?
No, I've known him all his 40 years. That's about it. Put up with him for 40 years.
Nice and simple, like that. So, before we get going, there might be some listeners who were hoping that with a mystery guest, I'd landed an interview with, say, David Attenborough, and others that might be thinking it's totally uncool to interview your mum on a podcast. So what would you say to those people?
I would think that you're probably curious to hear what my responses are to your questions. You've asked all sorts of people, haven't you, in various educational fields and various fields of knowledge. And maybe you just think I'm just your mum. So I think it might be interesting. I think you might be surprised that I've got some views about things that you don't know about.
Yeah, I think you're right. We haven't really sat down and had a proper chat about these things. We might talk about trees in passing, but here we are in your house in Dorset on a Sunday afternoon, and you've agreed to have a chat with me about trees. You've heard a few episodes of the podcast, so you know the format, but other than that, you've got no idea what I'm going to ask you today, have you?
No,
So how are you feeling about that?
I'm fine. I'm fine about that. I wonder if you'll get a word in edgeways, because I've thought about what you might ask me. I know you're likely to ask me what trees mean to me. And when I started thinking about that, that took my mind and my thoughts and memories off in all sorts of directions.
Okay, well, should we go there then?
Yeah.
All right, so what do trees mean to you, Mum?
Well, when I thought about that, what do trees mean to me, I was taken back to being 5 years old, starting school. My school was built in the 1950s and was a single-storey, quite modern building with a veranda. And I was always very proud of knowing the word veranda at the age of 5. I knew what a veranda was, and a lot of people didn't. But the point I'm getting to is there was an infant school building and a junior school building with a massive playing field, probably bigger, as I was a small child. And in the middle of the playing field were 2 oak trees. And the 2 oak trees were the border between the infant and the junior school. And I was taken back to summer and being out playing on the field. And the rule was that if you were in the infants, you did not go past the 2 oak trees onto the junior field. And those 2 huge trees, there was a space between them. They were guards, they were sentinels, they were like giants that I would never have gone past. And that has taken me by surprise to sort of go back to that memory and think about them. And then I had quite fond memories of them because in the summer we had a picnic and our parents brought a picnic to school.
Yeah.
And we used to sit under the shade of these 2 trees in the height of the summer. And so they were shelter. They were part of our games. We couldn't run round them because we'd have gone on the junior side. I don't know what would have happened if we had. I never did it. Those 2 trees were a gateway. They were guards. So that surprised me that my memories took me in that direction. I really hadn't thought about them. I know that half of that site is now a housing estate and half remains as the infant school. And I've now got a need to go back and see those two trees.
Hmm. Where are they?
They're in Aldershot
Okay.
and what was Park School. And I need to go back and see if they're still standing.
Nice. All right. Well, that's a trip to go on together, maybe. I'd be
Yeah,
interested to see them. Obviously, they'll be a little bit older now.
they will. And I wonder if they'll be, as I could see them in my mind, I wonder if they'll be like that. And of course, the other thing that struck me was in those days at school, we had a nature table. In the classroom, you had a permanent nature table. And so we were forever dragging in acorns, oak leaves, anything from that tree. And we knew the seasons. It's made me realise, as very small children, how aware I was, we all were of the seasons. Did the tree have leaves on it? Were the acorns growing? We just knew what time of year it was and we related that, to that. And I think now children are less in touch with the seasons. The nature table had seeds on, so we knew all about seed dispersal, and we were 5 and 6 because we collected them. We knew all about sticky buds, horse chestnut trees, and it's just made me realise how in touch with nature we were, and the wonder of nature, and the wonder of finding a cobweb on a frosty day. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's there really for children anymore. So that took me by surprise. I really hadn't thought about it.
So that question of what they mean to you then, one way of looking at it has been to go into your past and think about the early trees that might have left an impression on you. But if you're thinking about your own relationship with trees since then, how has that changed? And have you got any kind of spiritual connections with trees, would you say?
I think so. I think I share your view. I see them as like the old, the wise people. I suppose I've got to this age and appreciate that we can't be written off as we get older. We've still got something to offer. I appreciate what when you talk about the ancient trees, and I think, what have you seen? What's happened to you? Have people danced around you? Have they carved their name on you? What have you seen in history? You've stood here for all this time, witnessing all of this. How wise you are. If you could speak to us, how wise would you be? And you've witnessed all these things in history that we read about, hear about. So I think, yeah, I am quite a spiritual person, Tom, and I'm very struck by the beauty of nature. Shapes of trees I find very interesting. I find myself, looking at shapes between the different species of trees and trying to recognise them and whether they're tall and slender or they're, very rounded. I find myself looking to see if they're symmetrical and perhaps, standing and staring and thinking how they grew, which branch came out first and then what came from that. And in a design world, I'm very interested in design and creative design, and I'm interested in flowing designs of branches and stems that come off of each other as well.
All right, well, here's a more left field question for you. If you were a tree, what kind of tree do you think you would be?
I think I'd be an oak with my feet firmly on the ground and solid. And I think things that have happened in life have meant that I've had to stand firm and not be knocked over by what things have thrown at us, and still doing that to some extent. I wouldn't be something that swayed in the wind. I wouldn't be something slender and willowy and whippy. I would be something that was very firmly rooted into the ground.
Interesting. And that kind of takes me on to something I wanted to talk to you about, actually. And I didn't know if it might come later in the interview. But hear me out, because I've got something I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
So when I was in Fiji last year, I had a month in Fiji on my own when Holly and the girls came home.
Yeah.
And so that was a really strange time. I actually was in an Airbnb and the owner was away for a while. And it was the first time I'd been on my own properly for a really long time. They'd kind of disappeared back to the other side of the world. And I wasn't sure if they'd abandoned me or I'd abandoned them, kind of thing. But also, yeah, I just kind of found myself wondering, what am I doing here? You know, we had a really kind of life-changing couple of months to that point. And then suddenly, yeah, the dynamic of that was going to change, because here I was going solo. So I was thinking about that and why I was there. And by that point, I'd already kind of been thinking about this idea that how trees had partly become my dad or replaced my dad, who, if the listeners don't know, left the family unit when I was about 4. So I kind of like settled on that idea that perhaps I've replaced my dad's presence in my life with trees as a guiding force or guardians of some kind. But then when I was actually thinking about that, I realized that when he left, it was literally 2 weeks after the Great Storm of 1987. So again, for our listeners, that was the biggest storm in the UK since 1703, and there hasn't been a bigger one since. It absolutely battered the south of England. 18 people lost their lives. 15 million trees came down, and, you know, thousands more were damaged. And what I realized was that those 2 weeks of the storm happening and then my dad leaving probably left quite a scar on me in more ways than one, actually. Whether it's just an idea in my head of something symbolic of that time, or whether this actually happened, and this is what I want to ask you about, was that I seem to remember an oak tree across the road outside the church round the corner. And I wondered if you might remember if that even happened, or if not, it doesn't matter. But could you maybe help me understand what it was like at that time? We don't have to go over the dad stuff, but I'm really interested in the tree side of it. You know, what was that like in our
What
local
do you remember
neighborhood?
about the tree?
In my mind's eye, I have this vision of an oak tree, kind of like 150 years old. I wouldn't have known that then. Just a big oak tree that was totally uprooted, and it was blocking the road.
Yeah, a tree did come down across the road.
Yeah.
A big tree, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do seem to remember that. But what's also interesting for me, obviously, I've ended up in a career and occupation wanting to protect trees. But has that maybe come from that time when I perhaps shortly after those 2 weeks was wishing that things were back as they used to be in one way or another, you know? And also, not only that, but I don't think we've ever had such a moment in the UK when everyone in modern times has been talking about trees, because we lost so many. They were a great inconvenience, but there was a great grief for all the loss of those trees and really important tree collections and treescapes. If you see the, you know, photos, it absolutely battered the landscapes and people's neighborhoods. And I just wonder if, yeah, you remember
I
anything
wonder
from
if
that
it
time.
was a case of it was a great force of nature that we hadn't experienced. As a nation, it pulled the rug from out of our feet. Like, wow, this came from nowhere. And I don't know if you know that the man, you know, that you hear about it, Michael Fish, on the weather, really played it down.
Yeah.
And so people weren't prepared for it.
Yeah.
They weren't prepared for it. And I don't know, in our own case, do you remember the shed roof came off and cartwheeled across the grass, and the corner of it smashed into the kitchen window and sent glass all up the hall that night?
Yeah.
And I wonder if it was the fact that as a nation, we were caught out, this devastation came along and we weren't ready for it. We weren't expecting it. And there was this thing, wasn't it? Anything could happen at any moment. Now, I believe that even as a small child, even if we don't listen to the news or read the newspapers, we imbibe that. We know about what the nation are feeling at the time. I find that quite interesting, that if you don't follow the news, you still feel very down, you feel very angry without actually hearing about it, talking about it. So I'm wondering, that was going on, Tom, for everybody and for us as a family, obviously. And then what happened was a parallel, it was a mirror. I didn't know your dad was going. I had no idea. So that was our own storm. On that Saturday, when we came back from Nant's house and his bags were packed, that was the first I'd known. I had not known anything about it. So if you think about it, the whole nation had this, the rug was pulled out. And then, as you say, 2 weeks later, it's like, what? What's happened? I felt like my world had come tumbling down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you would have felt that because of me, wouldn't you? You would have felt what I felt, and I was very distressed at the time. And, Nan and Grandad were there, but you would have felt that. So, yeah, I think it was a sort of a double whammy, if you like. It was a whole nation, and then it was a very personal, in our little family unit, the same thing happened.
Yeah. Because a tree or a father, particularly if you're 4, they both feel like consistent forces in your life. Or
Yeah.
you think you could have a certain amount of kind of trust and
Yeah, I
leaning
think
upon
it's
them,
about trust. I was just going to say, I think that's about trust and believing these giants of trees, they've stood all this time, they'll still stand. And to see one lying across the road and its roots ripped out of the earth by something invisible
True. Yeah.
was what happened to us.
Yeah.
I believed in that marriage, and I believed in my relationship with your dad, and I trusted him. And there was this disbelief, so again, there's all those feelings, they're still carrying on. We're still having repairs done. We had roof tiles we had to sort out all the practical elements, the shed, what have you. And then while you're reeling from that, wham, there's your personal thing comes along. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was really kind of a bit of an epiphany when I realised that. I didn't know if the oak I imagined by the church was real, but I also thought that was like right outside the church, which I know now, like my sister Claire, her christening was like 6 months earlier or so at that church. Obviously, I went to nursery there, so that was kind of like a centre of the community at the time. And then that tree, I think, symbolic that, it was kind of chaos, if you like. But yeah, I think to your point, it's sort of the shock of all of that.
Yes.
Definitely speaks to how, we expect to know what the weather will be doing, but actually nature is a greater force that we can't ever predict fully. And I think coming back to Fiji, if I round off that kind of anecdote, what I realised was that I was in a place, yes, it was on the absolute other side of the world, but here I was in a place where they actually have cyclone seasons every year, and they just get on with it, and they are extremely resilient because Fiji's 330 odd small islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's literally at the mercy of nature in that respect. And so those greater forces and the storms that come off the ocean have long affected those civilizations there. And so they've just learned to cope with that, And there was a really strong sense of community in the indigenous and tribal communities I was really privileged to spend some time with. But I spoke to them a lot about cyclone season, and honestly, they just kind of so matter of fact about it that, we rebuild, They haven't got such an investment in material things as we have here. But not that they don't value things and possessions and have pride in things and the use of things, but they're not as important, I guess, there, I would say, in general, from what I observed. But I think that partly comes from that, is that they get a reality check every storm season, every cyclone season. So that was just a real kind of humbling lesson for me,
maybe
actually.
it's an awareness of the force of nature and respect for it. Are we aware of it? And I'll go back to saying about the nature table. Do we just live in this world and we're not really open and aware of the world around us? Which I believe, as children, we certainly did. We knew plant names. There were all sorts of things that we knew about then. And I don't know if we were to ask today's children if they knew. Very interesting that, you were sort of saying about that, because what's then come to me when we talk about that time of the storm and Dad going, is I started having dreams at that time, and they were dreams about being in a gymnasium with a sprung wooden floor, like a parquet floor, which was sprung, golden wood, with the sun streaming in windows. And I talked to somebody who knew an awful lot about dreams and psyche, and he said to me, "Do you like wood?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Well, this is your psyche placing you on the wood so that you can deal with what's happening in your waking times," which is really interesting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And all of this sort of points to putting a faith in trees and their wares, I guess. And that was really reflected in Fiji also, that they really saw trees in their traditional culture, at least, which some of that was taboo in the city, or, they were it's sacred actually, but it was things they weren't particularly comfortable in talking to Westerners, because they knew they might not get it, or they might poo-poo it, or you downplay it. But in essence, for thousands of years in Fiji, they viewed trees and forests and other living things as part of their extended family. So both of those things together, that resilience that they show towards the storms and the cyclones and rebuilding and keeping on going, and then also that special relationship they have with trees in particular, seen as almost like next of kin. It felt like a home from home in a way, which was interesting.
I think you've always been open to thinking about these things, and I think you and I have talked on this sort of level all through your life, actually. I think we've talked about things that other people might have gone, "Really?" Or "This is a load of mumbo jumbo." But you and I have talked about a lot of things like this and gone, "Oh, right, I'll think about that."
Yeah, well, I think we can really, or I say we, I think society in general feels like it has to know and be able to explain everything. But I actually think it's healthy not to try and explain everything, and to actually leave some questions open and hanging, and know that there are certain things that are way beyond our comprehension, and also ones that deserve respect.
Yeah, no, I think we have talked on that level for a long time about, all sorts of things.
What have you kind of drawn resilience from in your life then? So if trees are what I have lent upon, or at least come to in my later years, then yeah, what about yourself?
Home for me. Home is very important, a place to come back to. Funnily enough, that word shelter, isn't it, coming back? I think of trees as shelter. I thought of those oak trees as shelter. But I grew up with a garden with an apple tree, and the apple tree also was shelter. We made camps in that tree and strung sheets about in it and made shelters. That's something. And so home and shelter, almost hiding place, I think of.
It's like the idea of building a base that you can feel safe
Yeah,
in.
which goes back to my oak tree, doesn't it? And we've got to have a solid base in the ground, rooted. Yeah.
And then, yeah, obviously you've supported me with various kind of directions I might have gone on, or hairball schemes, and kind of, I guess as well, watch me grow in one way or another, and watch me lose the odd branch here and there, probably. But yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to kind of take a moment to just say that I really appreciate how you've kind of backed me to find my own path with things, and to say thank you for that. But also, yeah, curious to know what you make of this kind of tree journey that I've been on for quite some time, or settled upon for quite a few years now.
I think it's a lovely journey to be on, because I always wanted both of you and your sister, to have jobs that didn't feel like jobs, that were passions. I always wanted that for you. And I used to say to you when you were little, both of you, I don't mind what you do later on in life. I'm not looking and expecting you to be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever. I want you to be happy in your work. I wouldn't mind what it was. And so I'm pleased for you, because I can see that this is your passion. I wouldn't want anything better for you than the job you do. I've learned an awful lot about trees from you, and you've made me really look at them. And I tell lots of people, I take what you tell me and I tell other people, and other people are like, wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, how do you know that? And I said, my son told me about that.
Yeah, but that's all borrowed from other people as well. Like, I'm just passing on what they've said. So
I know, but people say to me, like the oak trees growing down, that fascinates me. I look at every oak tree now and think, oh, look at that. And I've told other people, and now they've come back to me and said, I've started looking at oak trees now, and this notion of them growing down and getting lower towards the ground, and the canopy getting lower. Do you remember going and walking up in the New Forest, and would you show us walking hazels?
Walking beech trees.
Walking beech trees, where I'd sent all these things up. And you talk about forest fires, don't you? And here we are at Easter, and you ask me if I'm spiritual, and we're at Easter and we're talking about a man who was dead and then was alive. And that's why I think with trees, and you talk about that and how this life appears. You think it's a disaster and nothing's left. It's a desert, and then new life comes. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that kind of reverence for that kind of renewal process is a long-standing one. And nowadays, actually, we place that faith in Christianity into the idea of a man being born again. But it's around the same time of year, isn't it, that we start seeing all this new life come about. We've changed the focus of what that is, but obviously that came from kind of pagan beliefs, or a time when we would have had more of a sacred reverence for nature, or the divine feminine, whatever you want to call it. It's interesting how the fashions change like that, isn't it? But yeah.
I think that's quite a spiritual thing. And you asked me how I felt about you and what you do and your passion for trees. And I think of you when you were a small baby, it was the fashion to put your baby in a pram outside in the fresh air. And we had a cherry tree in the garden, and I used to hang toys in the tree and park your pram under it. And you would lay there for ages looking up at the tree, at things that were hanging in the tree that caught your eye, but under the tree. And I sometimes think, oh, maybe I sparked something there, because that's another thing I like. I like tree tunnels. And do you remember we would drive around? I go, oh, tree tunnel, where the trees have met over the road. And I love looking up through leaves. I love to stand under a tree and look up through the crown at the sunshine.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, thanks for allowing me those experiences. And I'm sure they're all in there forming my appreciation. But yeah, I do just want to check, how long did you leave me out there for?
Till you were cooked.
Nicely sunburned, and then, yeah, wheel me back in.
That's right.
Fair enough.
Yeah, till I came back from the town.
Yeah, times were different back then, weren't they?
They were.
Okay, well, thanks for a really insightful chat. I really appreciate it. You've given a lot in this short half an hour that we've been talking, as you always do. And it's only right that, as my mum, that you kind of get the final say, the last word on this one, really. So I'm going to hand to you for your parting words of wisdom for me and for anyone listening to this interview. But yeah, thanks, Mum.
Yeah. Well, I just think what you've said about allowing your child to follow their path and follow their passion, I think that's important. I've got 3 grandchildren now, your daughters and a grandson. I love watching them and what their interests are. So that, and I think also being open. I don't think there's anything wrong with being spiritual, a bit superstitious. I think just being open and listening to people and not negating it, but actually just taking it in and going away and on your walk thinking, they said that, now let me ever think about that.
You've been listening to the Meaning of Trees podcast. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And see you next time.